Hey, this is Wes. So in this video, we're actually going to go through and just kind of visually explore what was discussed in the article. And so what I want to talk about here is our material color blend. So as we discussed in the article, we have our material color blend, which allows us to take various types of effects. So like in the case here that we're seeing in this graph, like I have a metal edge wear. And I can grab this here from our mask generators. We have all these different types of weathering effects and wearing type filters. We can just bring these here into our graph. We can feed these into the material color blend, and here you can see that this material color blend is actually being fed another full material. We select the material color blend, and then here in the properties panel we have all the different channels, and we can actually go into each one of these channels, like say our diffuse, and we can actually set up those particular properties that this filter here, how it's going to affect each one of these different channels. So for instance, metal edge wear, what color is it going to give the diffuse? What is it going to, how is it going to affect the roughness? How is this edge wear going to affect the metallic? How is it going to affect the normal map? And we have all these settings. And so we can easily bring in a filter. The filter's driven by some type of mesh data that gives them information about the mesh itself. We can then go into the filter. We can actually change all these different parameters. And then we just feed that here into the material color blend. Like I said, the material color blend acts as like a junction box, and it basically routes this effect, and basically we can control how that effect is basically propagating down through all of the channels. And then finally we just take that full material again and we're just piping that down. So here in Substance Designer's graph here, I'm actually working in compact material. However, if I move this over into material or just standard, so if we just put this in standard, you can actually see all these channels that we're working with. And this is like the true power of Substance Designer, is that we're sitting here and we're working with all these various channels all at the same time. In the background, Substance Designer is working to combine all these channels. We can take an effect such as metal edge wear, we can make changes to it on the fly, and those changes are going to propagate down through all these channels. So you can imagine if you were using something like, say, Photoshop, and the amount of trouble it would be to manage all these various layers, to make a change to something like, say, your edge wear or dirt, and then having to go through and make sure that that change gets placed on all the different channels that you're working with in various layers. However, Substance Designer will handle all that for us automatically. So here we have some shortcuts, 1, 2, and 3. I'm just going to hit the 3 key here just to collapse all the channels. So instead of having to go through and work with all those channels, again, we can just basically close all those channels down, or just basically composite those down into a single output, and we can actually just work with that single output. And that is what the material workflow does inside of Substance Designer. So what we want to do is, for this video, I want to just kind of go through and just kind of recreate the dirt effect. We'll just do it here on the fly so you can see how that would work. So the first thing that we want to do is come over to our mask generators and grab our actual dirt effect. So here at the top, I have a dirt. Let's just go ahead and just left click, drag and drop that here into our graph. And we're just going to just basically pipe. We're just going to bypass all this middle stuff here. And so just some quick background. I have a few sections here in my graph. So this section here is, these nodes here are basically making up kind of like this hemp string material. This section here is making up the burlap. This section here, this is my iron here, so all the iron metal portions. And then finally down here at this portion here, we actually have the wood texture that you see here. And so we have 4 different materials. Each one of these materials is made up of several channels, being the diffuse, the roughness, the metallic, and the normal. Again, if we go ahead and just expand, you can see that each one of these materials, we're working with all these different channels. So if I go ahead and just, again, we'll just comp those back down, I can actually pipe each one of those materials over to a single node, the multi-material blend node, and I can blend all these materials onto a single asset. And it's basically just something that's just driven here by this single SVG map that can be baked automatically in Substance Designer. So this map here just is telling where all these materials need to be placed on this model. And now that I have that, I can work with all of these 4 materials and all of their associated channels as one single entity, or this one output. And then what we're going to do is just output that into a material color blend so that we can continue to blend various effects on top of that. And so here's, again, we're going to go back to our dirt. So let's go ahead and I'm going to hit 2 on the keyboard to kind of expand my channels. The dirt is looking for 2 inputs, a curvature and an ambient occlusion. So we'll go ahead and just, well, here, we'll just leave that open here. So I actually have a couple of these maps already, and like I said, you can actually bake these in Substance Designer if you want, or you can use some of the utility tools here to actually derive those maps from existing maps. So for instance, if you want to get a curvature here in the library, you can just search out curvature. So if we just start typing in curve, you can see here we have a curvature node. If you want to go ahead and pull ambient occlusion without having to bake it, you can do that as well. So if I come over here and I just start to type in AM here, you see the ambient occlusion node. If I pull this guy here into my graph, it takes a height. So now we need a height map. So let's just come over here to our height. And here we have a normal to height. So what I could do is if I just have a normal map, I can feed the normal map, connect that here, and what I'll end up getting is an ambient occlusion. And I'll just show you how that works just real quick here. So let me just grab the normal map and I'll just make that connection. And so if I just double click this node here, now all of a sudden I have some ambient occlusion information for that wood. I also have a height map if I want as well. So Substance Designer has a lot of these utilities for quickly generating these various types of maps. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and just delete these two nodes that we have here. And since I already have these maps, so here's an ambient occlusion, I'm just going to copy and paste this guy. And I'm going to take this, we're just going to branch this guy up here, so make it nice and clean here. And let's also grab our curvature node. Again, we'll just copy and paste this guy. One of the things that you can do here, and with this kind of graph view that's really nice, since it's very organic, we'll go ahead and collapse these guys, is you can reuse these elements. So right now I'm just kind of copying and pasting these and just moving them just for visual clarity for this video. But you'll see that, for instance, here with my ambient occlusion, I've got this one single ambient occlusion node, and you can see all these connections, and where it's routing to all these various places. So you can have things like a levels control, a hue saturation, or something like that, and it can actually control various different channels, without having to like copy and paste and having various different. So like for instance, if you had like a levels control that was doing a very particular adjustment, and you wanted to reuse that instead of copying and pasting it all over the place, you can have it actually route to different connections. And then if you make a change to that one node, it will propagate to all the other nodes. So it can really help, with your workflow in a sense that gives you more of kind of an organic, feel to how you're working. So here we have our curvature, our ambient occlusion. Let's go ahead and just make these connections here. So I'm going to go ahead and just feed this in here into my dirt. I'm also going to take my ambient occlusion and feed that in here. And now that I have that done, I'm going to go ahead and just collapse these down. So now I don't have to worry about, all these node channels here. So we've gone ahead and made those connections. If I double click here, you can see that we actually have this dirt effect. Now we want to apply this dirt to just the metal in this case. So that's what we're working with. Well, right now we're applying the dirt everywhere. So we have this mask, this little mask input here. And so one of the things that I did is I went in and I baked out a little mask here. And let me just go ahead and grab that. So here in my resources here, my crossbow resources, I actually have an SVG here. Well, here, let me just actually pull this from my actual graph that I've been working with here. So the first thing I'll do is I'll grab this node here. So this right here, as you can see, is just a quick mask. The way I got this was I just came over here to my crossbow, do bake model information, and if I take a look at the FBX file, that FBX file, you can see the actual materials that are associated with it. And so I just wanted to bake a mask for the iron. So all of the polygon faces that have the iron material associated with them. So I'll just turn off like my burlap, the hemp, and the wood. And now I'm just baking the iron. And I did a convert UV to SVG. And I'm going to go ahead and I set this to pure white. And so what it did was when I baked, it took the material for iron and the polygon faces, which then again have these UVs associated with them, and it just filled those UV shells with pure white. And it was a really quick way for me to generate this mask that you see here. So this is just a black and white mask and the white areas are basically denoting what's metal in my on my mesh here. So let's just grab this guy again, just for visual clarity. We'll copy and paste it, and we'll move it up here towards the top, and we'll take this mask and we'll feed it in. And so now you can see, and we'll double click here, that our actual dirt effect is now only affecting just the metal areas. So in this case, we're only working with the metal portions. So now we have our filter in place. We can come over here to our instance properties for this dirt node, and we can start to change things like our dirt level. We can pull the contrast down, adjust grunge, and things like that. And you can see here in our 2D view that it's updating in real time. So now what we want to do is we want to take this effect, and we want to have this effect drive or affect the actual channels of our material. So again, our channels being the diffuse, the roughness, the metallic, and the normal. So what we'll do is we'll come over here to our material filters, we'll go to blending, and we'll grab our material color blend. So we'll just left click, drag and drop this right here into our graph. Now, the first thing that this guy is looking for is a material. Well, we have our material here, and we're going to start from scratch on this, so we're going to kind of bypass all the other effects I've been doing. And we're going to take this node here, which is all 4 materials being blended down, and we're just going to take this single output, and we're just going to plug it here into the material input. And so now we basically have, we'll just double click to view this in the 2D view, we're basically looking at all channels. Now, just by double clicking this, you can see that I'm actually just looking at the diffuse. However, if I go into just material mode where I expand, I can actually go through and take a look at, say, our roughness. So here's our roughness map. Here's our metallic. Notice the metallic again, like I had mentioned in the article, binary map, very contrasty. White means that it's metal, black means that it's not metal. And so you can see that we're actually looking at all these different channels. So again, let's just go ahead and basically clamp these guys down into one entity. So now we have our material color blend. Here we have our filter. Let's go ahead and apply our filter. So we'll just kind of move these nodes out of the way here. Could just kind of get this a little bit easier to see visually how we're going to do this connection. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take this dirt and we're going to feed it right here into the mask. So this filter is basically what we call mask generators. It's just creating a mask that we're then going to feed into the material color blend. So we'll just feed this straight in here. We'll make this connection. We'll double click the material color blend. It's going to show what we're actually creating here on our diffuse texture. And so if we just kind of zoom in here into this metal area, we can now, with the material color blend selected, go over to the instance properties, and we can actually start to control how this effect, so this dirt, how it's going to actually be, or we can actually control its effect on each channel individually. So let's go over to our diffuse. So right now it's set to white. Well, we definitely just don't want that to be white. Let's maybe make it something like maybe a little bit kind of maybe a little dark brown here. And you can see as I start to change this color here in the 2D view, it's already updating for us. So let's do something about like this, and we can go in and we can change the blending mode on this if we want. We can actually go through here. What I'm going to do is make this, I'm going to set this to multiply, and I'm going to adjust the opacity down just a little bit. So here you can see in the 2D view, we have basically, just with a few sliders and a color pick here, we've gone ahead and we've said how this dirt is affecting the diffuse channel. So we're done with diffuse. We'll come over to normal, and we can say that, well, I don't want this dirt to actually drive the normal map in this case. So let's take the height intensity and just pull it all the way down. The next thing is roughness. So if we look by default, the roughness is all the way up at here at our luminance values, all the way set. So it's pure rough. That's probably pretty good. I don't want it to be 100% rough, so let's just pull it down just a bit here. So, you know, again, one of the things with a PBR workflow is roughness is, I always like to say roughness is king. So your roughness map, there isn't a right or wrong choice to that. There isn't like there's a specific value for roughness. Roughness is where you become the most creative with your maps. So, you know, the roughness is where you can really have a lot of the creative freedom to really go in there and add all these different types of, you know, scratches and blemishes and all this type of weathering types effects and really have your asset, really bring the character of your asset out in the roughness map. So here I'm just going to kind of, you know, pick something that looks kind of good to the eye here. And then finally we've got our metallic, and right now it's set to, well, this is pure metal. So the next thing that we'll do is we'll just take this and this material color blend, and I'm going to go ahead and just pipe this right down into our actual outputs. So in order to view the effect on the 3D model, we have to actually pipe it down to the outputs. The outputs are what are exported, or the textures that are created when we publish a substance, or if we just export the bitmaps. So it's really easy to make this connection in material mode. We'll just take the single output, start to connect it. SubDesigner is going to know that we're working in material composite mode, and it's going to make all the connections for us. Now, it did overwrite my ambient occlusion. You can see that right now it's pure white. I don't want that. I have an ambient occlusion map, so I'm just going to go ahead and just feed that straight in like this. So in this case, just for now, I'm just going to feed it in an ambient occlusion. And so now, if we take a look here, we'll just double click. You can see that we now have some dirt, and now we can actually go through and start to make some tweaks here to this material property. So now that we can see it in our 3D view, let's go ahead and start to change this a bit. So again, let's go over to our roughness. I will increase my roughness a bit. Let's go back over to my diffuse. We'll bring our opacity up here just a bit. You can see where that's starting to change here. Let's actually start to work with the dirt itself. So here I'll go ahead and grab the dirt, and let's go ahead and just increase our dirt level. So I'll start to pull the dirt level up. Now you can see that we're really starting to see some dirt across this guy. So maybe that's too much. I'll pull this down a little bit. This is the fun part, where you can really start to just kind of get, kind of artistic with what you're doing. So here I'm going to pull my dirt contrast down quite a bit. Again, I'll pull this up, a little bit more dirt. And I think that's too much. Let's just pull this down just a bit more. And so now you can see how that's affecting, the diffuse. Let's go back over to our material and our roughness. Pull the roughness down just a little bit. I do think that dirt, it is a bit too, I don't like how it's affecting the diffuse color. So yeah, let's do this. Let's pull the opacity down some. There we go. It's looking a bit better. And again, we'll go back and just increase that dirt level just a little bit here. There we go. Okay, so the next thing that I want to cover is how this dirt is affecting our metallic channel. And so if we take a look at this right now, here I'm looking at the diffuse, and here in our diffuse you can see that we have the dirt is here in our albedo texture. If we double click the metallic, you can see that here's our metallic map. So it's very, again, binary. White is denoting that it's metal. If we sample this area here, you can see that it's 255, meaning okay, this is just pure white, pure metal, full white here. And so we actually have an issue with this. So if we take a look at our diffuse, again, like I was saying, we have some, we actually have some darkening happening here, where the dirt is basically just overlaying that metal surface. So we have a metal surface, and then we have some dirt that's on top of that metal surface. So it's not actually metal, there's dirt on top of it. And so what we need to do is actually compensate for this in the metallic map. So in a PBR workflow, the reflectance value for the metal is actually stored in the diffuse. So, and that is if we're using the roughness metallic map workflow. So in this workflow, which we're using, roughness and metallic, the actual reflectance value is stored here within our diffuse. And so these metal reflectance values are actually pretty bright in the real world value. And so what we have here is this value is actually pretty dark. So if we take a look at this, you can see that it's definitely below kind of like a rough average of 180. If we take a look at the RGB, we're here. If I just sample this here, you can see that we're actually far below that. And so what we need to do is compensate for that. So we need to come over here to our material color blend. We need to come over to the metallic, and we need to adjust the luminance value for this. So I'm going to bring this down. And so kind of, again, like another rough estimate, if we're looking at this at 0 to 255. So, if you kind of look at like maybe just kind of like a range of around 240 to 255, we can look at that as like, mainly full metal. And so what we want to do with that is we need to make sure that we just bring that value down. Again, because if we take a look at the values that we're actually working with, that reflectance value that we're actually placing in our diffuse texture is actually very dark. And so what's happening is if we tell this metal value, if we kept it at white, then the reflectance value, so the shader would look at this and say, oh, that's full white, I need to get the reflectance value from the diffuse. The diffuse would be kind of a dark value, and this would give us an incorrect metal. So this would be not correct. So we need to come over to our metal. We're going to take our luminance, and again, like I said, we're going to drop this down a bit. And so now if we take a look at our map, you can see that we do still have kind of, this fairly binary map here where, like the white's the metal and black is non-metal. But if we zoom in here into the white areas, you can see that we've now introduced a little bit of darkening to this. Basically, we're saying the dirt is like a non-metallic surface here. And so again, what I might do is just come back over to this guy and just slightly adjust it. This can be kind of tough, in a sense of trying to figure out exactly where exactly what values to use and things like that. But what I'm doing here is this being able to use the material color blend to just easily tweak this value here and basically denote how this dirt is affecting my metallic channel. Okay, so there you have it, how we can use the material color blend node to actually take an effect from the mask generator, such as dirt, and we can use it to control how that particular effect is going to propagate down through all of our channels. You can see that, again, it's just a simple control as we go through. SubDesigner is doing all the heavy lifting for us and propagating those effects down through all the channels. And again, in the end, it makes it to where we can add weathering and wear types of effects to our assets in a very quick manner. Also, again, another beauty about this is I can come back to this single node, and now I can start to change the actual dirt level, the contrast. I can make changes to this, and I don't have to worry about how it's affecting the maps. So the material color blend is controlling, how those effects are going to basically propagate down to the channels and how it's affecting those channels. So now once I've set that once, I don't have to worry about that again. And now when I go and I start to get a bit more artistic with how I'm going to be working with my dirt control itself, meaning like the level, the contrast, and all that stuff, I can make those kind of changes and know that it's going to propagate down to all my channels without me having to go back and say, well, I changed the dirt, now I got to copy that and put it on the roughness or the metallic map and and all that kind of stuff. So SubDesigner, again, is doing all the heavy lifting for us. Again, another beauty about Substance, we can actually expose these values. So if we wanted to bring these into a host application such as like Maya, 3ds Max, or Unreal Engine 4, or Unity, our game engine, we can actually work with these level effects right there in that host application or that game engine, and we can make these changes at runtime. And again, it will propagate down and recompute all the maps for us.